City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, performance.
Seminars, now in their 27th year, coming to you from the new Graduate Center of the City University of New York. These seminars provide a keen insight into what it's like to be professional working in the theater. Today's seminar is devoted to performers. We will learn something about how and perhaps why they chose to be performers, their work ethic, and why they work in the theater. I know that you will enjoy and learn from today's panel. I'm Isabel Stevenson, Chairman of the Board of the American Theater Wing. So now, let me introduce our moderator for the seminar, distinguished playwright Peter Stone. Peter.
I'm delighted to be a part of today. Playwrights don't get to formally discuss things with actors, and I promised Isabel and Roy that I won't get into too many controversial subjects, although we'll set the ball rolling. We have six Isabel used the word professional, six of the most professional actors one is apt to run into in New York, all of them very currently and well employed. And it's going to be interesting to discuss because they are also vastly different from one another. Adam Pascal is now playing Madame in Aida, and he has done Rent both in New York and in London. Tanya, who is now doing Wild Party 2. What do we call it? Wild Party. Wild Party. It's the excellent Wild Party. And we know her from Jelly's Last Chance. John, we know from everything. He has been in every form and medium. I wouldn't be surprised if you were a stilt walker at one point. He's now off-Broadway in a play called The Director. Jerry Jones needs no identification, nor Patrick, but both, she's as successful a stage actress as there is in the New York theater, currently now in the O'Neill Moon for the Misbegotten, and her performance in to choose just one, which won every prize they offer in the Heiress, is a legend. Patrick Stewart is known perhaps the widest because little children know him. They know him twice. They know him because he's constantly on their television sets, but they also know him because of his one-man production of appearance in The Christmas Carol. He is currently doing Arthur Miller's latest play, Walk Down Mount Morgan, and he is where he has gotten remarkable reviews. And finally, Jennifer Ehle, least known in America, a very temporary condition. Her performance in the Tom Stoppard revival, I hate the word revival, it's like it's been dead. It's not dead. It's a reproduction of Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing, and she has received justifiably raves. And she's a beautiful and remarkable actress, and we welcome her here and hope she stays. So here we are, and we're going to start to talk about something. One of the things I think that everybody is always curious about, especially anyone who has ever tried to act in school or in amateur productions or whatever, there's something that actors do which is very difficult for other people to understand, normal people to understand, and that is, how do you sublimate self? How do you literally drive yourself out of your insides and invite in the part you're playing? How hard is that, and how happy is that, is what I'd like to start to do. Let me start with people who've been doing it longer than some of the others, and then get around. That's why I turned to Adam.
Very
Well, why don't we just go in order? I think that's the fairest way to do it. Adam, you're doing musicals more than the rest of us, although Tanya also does musicals. What is the process for negating self? Is that a fair way to put it, or
Sure.
isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would equate it to sort of taking off your clothes. And for me, the longer I do a show, the more layers of clothing I'm able to take off. My intention is to be able to take it all off at once, but I can't do that. I'm just not capable of doing that. I need the experience of an extended run. I need years and years. No, I do, but I need lots of performances and lots of work to be able to take those layers off. So, you know, for me, it's just about the continual process of doing it night after night and being able to expose myself just a little bit more, and making that performance just a little bit realer, bringing this character a little bit more to life and making him less like me and more like himself.
Tanya, and how much of you now is Kate, and how much of you is Tanya? Does Tanya go? Is Kate it while those 2 hours are out there on the stage?
My process is probably the opposite of his process. I think of it more as living truthfully in imaginary circumstances, so I don't try to get rid of Tanya. I might try to make Tanya more than Tanya is in her own life in the process of creating a character, but I sort of begin the work by looking at a script and imagining it as I would want the greatest actor of all time to do it. And then over the course of rehearsals, taking chances, risking falling on my face, and trying to get myself to reach to places that maybe I couldn't do it in my life at all. But if the character has to do that, then I have to do that there. So in that sense, I don't think I negate myself. I actually expand myself through the work that I do.
John, you've done you've appeared in all of the media, really. You've done a tremendous amount of television and film and stage and God knows what else. What I want to know is, how is it different? How is becoming the character, how would you define the difference between doing it in front of a camera where you are sometimes out of context, where the people around you are all technical and are all staring in at you under lights, and you have to get a kind of a jump start on each time they call camera, as opposed to finding that character on the stage?
I had to think about this some time ago, Peter, so this isn't a glib answer. I've thought about it for a long time. And it boils down to this kind of metaphor for me, that working for film is like oil painting, because every take and every gesture and every scene every day over a period of shooting 4 or 5 months, or 3 or 4 months, 3 or 4 weeks, whatever it might be, you can add things very, very quickly, and you have a length of time to do that. The way in canvas, with oil paint, things set very slowly, and you can change it, you can adapt it, and the portrait begins to take shape over a period of time. In television, you have to work very quickly, and so I think of it as watercolors. The things set very quickly. You have to make your decisions very quickly about the portrait that you're painting of that character, because oftentimes you may have a day or a scene or an hour to come up with something, and so you have to work very, very intuitively and very, very quickly. But the theater, the greatest thing about the theater is that it's also a process that happens over time, but a much longer time than film. So I think of it as sculpture. And I think of it as a kind of carving away of a big block of granite or something, that somewhere there inside this, there lies an ideal performance, an ideal portrait of this character that I'm trying to play. And that the thing that sustains me night after night is knowing that if I keep chipping away, I'll find this ideal form somewhere within this large block of time. And that's the thrill of it, chipping away and discovering.
Jerry, more than almost any real actress I know, you are not easily typed. You don't play characters that, I mean, normally producers, directors, so forth, they say, oh, I know, that's a part for so-and-so. Or that's
You're usually unmarried, I've noticed.
But you're thinking... but somehow the parts you have played, unmarried though they might be, are so vastly different in personality and character that it's very hard to type you. So that you, I mean, the person who's appearing now in the O'Neill is nothing to do with the person who came down the stairs in the Heiress, and so forth, and all the other parts, and that we've seen you do. So how do you inhabit a character, or is it the other way around?
Well, first of all, you are so good at this. I mean, here you are asking the same question and customizing it for each of us.
Well,
I just have to brag on you.
Well, there's a reason for that. It's not unapropos. No. I'm me.
Yeah.
For me, I've never been able to act because I couldn't stop being me. I like being me, and I can't stop it. And so the reason that, so I couldn't do what you folk do because I can't, for a minute, I don't want to be anybody else, right? Yeah. But, I mean, yes, of course, Warren Beatty. But nevertheless, so it's easy for me. I'm not trying to be somebody else. And that's the part that's mysterious to playwrights, and really very much so. It's a mysterious process.
Yeah. Well, I guess it is for us, too. As I've had 3 people to think about my answer, I know that with each role, it's completely different the way I go about it. I know that when I first read The Heiress, it was such a wonderful fit that I remember in reading it, and I was reading it thinking I was going to be playing Aunt Pennyman, which Francis, that my agents told me that I was reading for Aunt Pennyman, and I remember thinking, damn, this girl who's going to play Catherine is so lucky. And I kept, I pored over it, and I could feel the way she breathed. As I turned the pages, I could feel the way this young woman breathed, and the way you breathe is the way you stand, and the way you stand, and it was both emotional and physical at once, because those things do go together, the way we are emotionally and the way we breathe. I remember when I played Hannah Jelks, I was so overcome by the brilliance of this woman and the enlightenment of this woman that I knew I was sure I could never get anywhere near it because of that. She was so beyond anything I knew in my life. So I thought all I could do was show her the greatest respect by trying to build her a physical home that was worthy of this woman, and hope that she would then come, that her soul would come and inhabit this home that I lovingly built physically for her. She was from Nantucket. She was, I knew there was some things I wanted to, so I approached it more physically in the hope that the spiritual would come to inhabit the house I'd built. Each role demands something quite different from each of us, and at different points in our lives, I think. So I have absolutely no answer. No definitive answer.
Patrick, you have a problem different from the rest of the panelists in one sense. It's a happy problem, but it's nevertheless a problem, and that is you come out in front of audiences having to, in a sense, overcome their knowledge of you in this one startling part that everybody has seen. So the fact that you are an actor of enormous accomplishment who's played vastly different roles and have done Shakespeare here, and in The Tempest, I think, and having done all that, and having, but it seems to me that the first thing you have to do with an audience is somehow, or is it not in your mind at all, to say, I am not Picard, I am Patrick Stewart playing this role tonight?
Yeah. It's very much in my mind, and in fact, I had an ongoing battle with Jerry Schoenfeld, one of our producers, because I had worn a hairpiece for this role when we were at the Public Theater, and Jerry was passionately opposed to me wearing it on Broadway because he said people won't know who you are. Jerry wanted me to be identified as the actor who was in a successful television series. It's obviously good for business, I guess. So yes, a lot of what I do is often based on removing myself as far as possible from my spacesuit. Because I want the audience to see me as an actor and not as a kind of television iconic space figure. But I'd like to go back and just quickly address the original question, right, because my feeling about this has changed significantly over the years. I started out believing that acting was a form of disguise, and I spent years, decades, elaborately concealing myself. And it took me years to discover that didn't work for me. It was not allowing me a voice to speak. My voice was concealed. So something happened, and I changed all of that, and now it comes right down to the selection of the work. I look now for work that resonates for me, not necessarily for great roles or great plays, but something that is pertinent to my life now. And then I put that into the work, and putting self into the work has become almost the whole process now.
Jennifer Ehle, you are undergoing this remarkable success in this play, and you're being here. First of all, I want to ask two questions. One unrelated to the original question, and that is the difference between playing in London and in New York. Is there much of a difference?
There is quite a difference. There's the first few days when we started, we played for about 5 months on and off over the last year in London before we came here. We started at the Donmar, which was 250 people, and then we moved to the Obie in the West End, which was, I think it's 850, and then came straight here to the Barrymore. And it was, for the first few previews we did here at the Barrymore, it felt sort of like the audience, as though the audience felt like they'd been invited to a party and nobody was talking to them. And they were just, or offering them a drink or anything, that they were just sort of there because they want, and they seem now to be responding to a sort of generosity of playing, an emotional generosity, they've sort of called that from us. And the play is really shifting, and we're sort of opening up, and in a way that I don't know if English audiences in England would respond to. I don't know.
I think they've seen a little more serious theater lately than we have been treated to. This has not been a particularly rich 3 or 4 years for very, very serious theater. Right now, there's more on right now, given the 3 of your plays, and with Copenhagen arriving, than we have seen in quite some time. And the audiences, I think, are starting to respond to ideas rather than to some live version of television.
But they always did, I think.
I think
they didn't have the material available to respond to.
I mean, I think our play has benefited from that. I'm not
sure
saying
it
it's just benefited from it.
So let me now ask you the
it's less
question.
snobbish.
Patrick brought up a very interesting idea, and that was that how much of it is assuming another character, or how much of it is it wanting to be somebody else? In other words, burying it. In other words, that's really the question. How many actors try to hide who they are rather than become somebody else by assertion?
I have a quick answer.
Good.
I'll throw in. I sometimes have a hard time speaking. I come from a family of great storytellers in Tennessee, and I was never able to do that. I was very, the act was meant to be shy. I know that's the stereotypical thing. The actors are really shy, but I am kind of, and I am not particularly articulate, and to be able to go out on stage and speak O'Neill or Chekhov or Shaw or Paula Vogel or Tennessee Williams for 2 or 3 hours every night that's why I've stayed in the theater, because you don't get to do that in film, but you do get to do that in theater night after night, and to be as articulate as you ever dreamed of being. So that's it for me, I know.
Let me ask you, you brought up Tennessee, and it just through kind of just as a thought, you were born in England, but in London?
No, I was born in North Carolina.
North Carolina. Good. That's useful for the question I'm going to ask. Patrick, you were born...
I'm a Yorkshireman.
A Yorkshireman. You're in Tennessee.
Massachusetts.
Chicago.
The Bronx.
And the Bronx.
Yeah.
And I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and I keep thinking of something Yogi Berra said: if you come to a fork in the road, take it. What possibly could have happened to bring the 6 or 7 of us together at this day? What, in other words, what fork really in your life do you remember it that made that changed everything? And how close was it that you might not have taken it, Patrick?
I'm Adam. That's Patrick.
So you're Adam, and you're Patrick.
Although I don't mind being mistaken for it.
And the feeling is mutual.
Well, this is actually all still very new for me. I never set out to be an actor. I was always a musician and a songwriter, and that's how I ended up getting the job in Rent. And it sort of has snowballed, and I'm now a part of the theater community, which I'm completely honored to be a part of. But I'm still finding myself as an actor. I'm still finding my way, what techniques I'm going to use, however I'm going to manage to continue to have a life in the theater. I'm still finding what that is. And I've learned from every answer you've all given already. And I think that, I was fortunate enough to come upon a situation where I was able to use my singing ability to work and as a job, and that sort of opened up a lot of doors for me and exposed me to things that I never thought that I could do and never thought that I even had a desire to be a part of. And so that fork for me was just, that fork for me was actually the desire to see what it was like to audition for something. I had never auditioned for anything, and I never comprehended even getting the job. I just wanted to see what it felt like to audition for something.
How close did you come to not auditioning for it?
Very, this close.
That's what, it's amazing, isn't it? Do you remember a decision that you made, Tanya, that happened to change everything, and maybe it wasn't so automatic a decision?
Yeah, I'm sort of shy like Cherry, and I had a teacher who just sort of insisted that I was going to be an actress. And he would call schools and make them give me scholarships. And so I studied at the St. Nicholas Theater Company, and then he'd make me apply to other colleges. And I went to Carnegie Mellon. And over Christmas break, I was taking a vacation to Puerto Rico, and he had read in the paper that Hal Prince was coming to Chicago to audition for Merrily We Roll Along. And he wanted me to come home and audition. I was like, I'm going to Puerto Rico. I'm not coming to Chicago to audition. And it wasn't even for Hal Prince. I had to audition for a casting director who then had to decide if I could audition for Hal Prince. And it was like, no way. I'm not missing Puerto Rico because this woman is not going to give me that opportunity. And he convinced me to give up Puerto Rico, and Joanna Merlin did allow me to see Hal Prince, and he made a decision on that spot and flew us to New York the next day and cast me in that show. And I was never coming to New York. I had come and looked at Juilliard and said, I can't live in this city. I can't do it. So it really changed my life.
It seems to me that the fork, the choice, the thing that really changed it was going to that particular acting teacher.
Well, he was in my elementary school, He was an elementary school acting teacher, and he just pushed me and pushed me, and I probably wouldn't be doing anything if he hadn't pushed me and pushed me and pushed me.
John, do you remember what really changed, what really
Yes,
happened?
I do, Peter. I discovered acting in college. I had grew up in Massachusetts, in Springfield, Mass. Nobody from Springfield, Mass. ever went to Broadway, ever made movies, ever went to television. Nobody in my family, nobody ever. I'd never been to the theater. I'd never seen anything on stage. My parents would barely let me go to the movies. I only watched television one day a week, and then it was like the wild world of Disney. And I was like totally sheltered, The first black person I ever met was Brian Gumble, who was my freshman roommate in college. It was like so stupid. So then suddenly, I was in this college up in Maine, Bates College, and I was going in to sneak into where I'd left my backpack to get a fake ID to buy some beer. And the acting teacher, who reminds me quite a bit of you, Isabel, a wonderful woman named Lavinia Schaefer. And she saw me come in to sneak in the corner where I'd left it there, because I was on the debating team, debating in football, and I'd gone there on a debating football scholarship.
Your usual debating football.
And I went to grab my ID, because the guys were waiting out in the car to go get the beer, and she said, "No, sit." And I said, "What?" And next thing I know, there's a script in my hand, and she read. And so, I'm sitting around with all these other people. The next thing I know, I'm reading, and at the end of the reading, she said, "Okay, you got the part. I'll see you tomorrow." I said, "What are you talking about?" It was Much Ado About Nothing. I had just gotten the lead to play Benedict.
You mean the play?
The play. The play by Shakespeare. And the next thing I know, in military uniform, on stage, speaking poetry and being amazingly articulate in front of couple hundred people and it's opening night, and it's like, you know, it's so thrilling. And I always loved Halloween. It was always my favorite time when you put on a mask and you become somebody else. And now I got a sword, and I'm with this beautiful woman saying, "Are you yet living?" You know, and saying things that I would never say. And anyway, I fell in love with it. And from that time, it's like football and debating came together in the theater because it was a team sport. And you got to speak, you know.
It's interesting because this is a successful response to that. When I arrived in college, my first play, I was 17. I wrote it. I cast it it was a very small college, and there was one terrific-looking guy who I wanted for the leading man, and he was in the economy. You know, he was studying economics and not the slightest interest in it. And I worked on, and finally he played it. It changed his life. He became an actor. He spent his whole life as an unsuccessful actor. Oh, man, I felt so I felt so good. But you know, we're sitting, you six are sitting here because it worked out, you know. Do you remember the moment that changed everything?
Well, I think I was headed so much in the acting direction my whole life.
Oh,
Little
really?
tap dance recital when I was 5, the end of my dancing career, but I remember the applause and all of that. And then I had a wonderful creative dramatics teacher, Miss Ruby Kreider, in my hometown. She always moved me. In fact, there's a friend here who remembers Miss Ruby. And then I went to, I saw Colleen Dewhurst and Jason Robards when I was 16, and Moon at a summer program at Northwestern, which was incredibly influential. And then I went to Carnegie Mellon, and that was very influential.
Were you a cherub too?
I was a cherub. Were you a cherub too? We got to talk. But I think probably what led me here is I came to New York, and I got into the Brooklyn Academy of Music Theater Company, and which I was really lousy in, and I was 23, and I didn't have an idea in the world what I was doing, but a crazy Romanian director named Andrei Belgrader saw me in the show I was doing there, and cast me as Rosalind in As You Like It, and took me up to the American Repertory Theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I did rep for 6 out of 10 seasons. And that's where I grew up as an actor, and that's where I got to finally, I think at the age of 33, felt I could hang my shingle as an actor, because I finally had the experience I needed. And I guess it was getting the part of Rosalind and going to that rep company that was the fork in my road. Because I don't know that I would have survived as an actor if I hadn't had a home where I could be
Do you think there are any sane Romanian directors?
No, not a one.
I found the fact that you studied tap. Now, I think you did with Tommy Tune. You did Steppin' Out on Broadway.
That was the first class I'd had since I was 5.
Really?
Yeah,
It was fascinating.
Right.
Was that play was quite interesting, incidentally. It didn't work, but it was really fascinating. No, I mean, it didn't work on the audience for some reason, but I found it really quite compelling.
We had a good time.
Yeah, I'm sure of it. Patrick, tell us about how when it happened that you'd made this decision.
I think there were 3 separate forks. The first one was when at 12, my English master, and you know, at least in the classical theatre in England, there is invariably an English teacher lurking somewhere in all actors' backgrounds. He cast me in a play, and the first time I walked on stage, I knew that I was in the safest place that I'd ever been in. Life wasn't too safe for me when I was growing up. The stage was absolutely home. And then at 15, I'd left school, not because I dropped out, the rumor got around. I didn't drop out. I'd finished the minimum that the state required then in England. And I was working on a local newspaper and doing a lot of amateur acting, and this conflicted with my duties as a newspaper reporter. And the editor gave me an ultimatum, which was to give up all my amateur acting and become a reporter or leave his newspaper. And
how hard was it?
It was so easy. I packed up my typewriter that within the half hour, and I was out of the building with my friend hanging on my heels saying that you're making a terrible, terrible mistake, don't do this. Then I went to try to find out how to become an actor. And then I guess the most significant other one was lecturing at UCLA in 1986 and finding that a man called Robert Justman, who was to be one of the executive producers of Star Trek, was attending this course of public lectures. I was talking about Shakespeare, and he said to his wife, "That's the captain." And so I guess that was a terrific change for me.
Jennifer, first of all, how did you get to, you're an American born, or was your family simply on holiday?
I just, no, my parents live in North Carolina. And I went to drama school in England, but my mother's English, so I always went back and forth a lot. And I changed schools 18 times, so I sort of got teased so much for having an American accent when I was there and having an English accent when I was here that I just became bilingual.
You don't get teased anymore.
Literally. And now I don't get teased, and I wouldn't work there if I didn't talk like this.
So when did the decision happen?
To be an actress. I don't think it ever did. I've done everything in reverse, I think, because I always wanted to be, I think probably the only reason I do it is I've got some chromosome glitch where I really do passionately want to be somebody else and don't have a very strong sense of self in some ways. So I always wanted to do anything I could to be somebody else, but I was always too shy to ever stand up in front of anybody and do it. So actually the training side of things was very painful because it involved doing that, but something kept driving me through it, and it wasn't actually until I first started being in front of a camera after I'd left drama school that I began to really feel that nobody was watching me when I was doing it, and that I could actually sort of go through the wardrobe. And in the last 2 years is only when I've begun to feel that on stage. So I've sort of done it all in reverse, and now I'm passionate about it and love it.
Well, you bring up an interesting question, which I was about to start some controversy, but there's an interesting question before that, and it has to do with craft. In the past generation or so, in the past 25, 30 years, craft has been waning a bit in terms of development of artists. It's not just in the performing arts, it's in the creative arts, the painters and musicians and so forth. They're impatient, and part of that, I suppose, is that it's very hard now to work, especially for performing artists, very hard to work out of sight. Because you start television and all, you're very visible. And I've noticed that craft keeps getting downplayed. Now, all of you seem very well grounded in it. There's talent and there's craft. And, but I wonder whether or not talent needs, my question is, does talent need craft? Yes.
That's what I wanted to ask, was you all make it sound so natural. It all came so easy, and that's what it was, and all of a sudden you're an actor. But I know that it wasn't like that. And so what did you bring to it? How did you know, Adam, you say, for more performances and more audience looking at you, you'll know how much to take off. Right. And each one of you have said in some form or other that you will know when you get that beat that this is the right thing for you. How do you know that? What do you bring to it? What went before to bring you to that stage that you can do this, to either take off the clothing, put it on, or to know how to react to the audience and know what the craft, to bring a craft to play? Where does that come from?
I mean, a tennis player spends 5 hours a day hitting a ball, hitting 1 million balls a day, you know. It has to be the most stultifyingly boring thing for an athlete to have to do that. And yet, because of their expertise and their talent, and you do it because you can't win without it. And does craft pose, again, I'll tell you, Adam, was it a bother?
It's not a bother, but I think that there is a definite lack of craft in the people of maybe my generation who are coming up, because you know, entertainment and the media is the dominating driving force on this planet, more than money, more than sex, more than anything. It's entertainment, it's getting your face out there, it's becoming a star. And so much of it is focused on youth. You know, the 18-year-olds, the 20-year-olds, and that's what's happening now. I guess it was always pretty prevalent, but I think it's extremely prevalent now. And people want to get out there and they want to do it immediately, and they don't have time to go to school and study, because look at all the people that have become all the famous movie stars, the 20-year-old movie stars who never went to school and studied. They never studied acting. They smiled and they become huge movie stars. And so everybody, you know, so kids and people who are growing up who want to be actors, they don't look at people such as yourselves who have studied and really put time into your craft and really worked at it to make yourselves the best artists you can be. They look at the peers, the people of their age who've never studied, who've never done anything other than smile and look pretty, and so that's what their goal becomes, and that's the more attainable goal because you don't have to do anything for that. So I think that's where the lack of craft comes from, and I know for myself, I need to study, but that doesn't mean that I'm gonna study because I'm a very undisciplined person when it comes to certain things like that. I feel that I have a certain amount in me that I'm able to do, and I know that there's vast amounts that I need to work on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I have the motivation to go out and work on it. And I think that, and that's just a flaw in myself. It's a flaw in my character, and it's a flaw in my professional motivation. But I think that a lot of people maybe suffer from that, but then, on the other side of the coin, I know a lot of people who spend years and years and years studying. They've gone to school, acting school, they've dropped out of high school, and they've been in acting school for years, and they get on a stage, and they choke, and they can't say a word, and they can't keep their eyes open, and they can't look at the audience, and they can't do anything. All they can do is work in the classroom. And working in the classroom and working on a stage are completely different things. It's two different animals. So, there's my long, convoluted answer.
Thank
Tanya,
you.
But
is there a craft that you all use? Is there in acting in the theater? Is there a craft that each one can say, well, I do this, but I don't do that? What is it?
You were going to finish your question?
No, I was just going to say, you doing musicals, you have more disciplines than in other words, to accomplish. There's singing and there's dance, which are, I'm not saying it's more difficult than that, but there are disciplines involved, and disciplines require craft.
Well, for me, I want to get to your original question, which is about talent versus craft, and I don't mean this in an egotistical way, but I think that some people are like anointed in a certain way. There are people who they're special, and you just can't take your eyes off them, or they have just something that is exciting about them. And sometimes I've gone to the theater and I've seen those people and I've wished they had some craft or some direction, because it's like there's all this fabulousness and it's just kind of spraying everywhere, and you wish they knew how to take it and focus it into a moment so that we could see that. And for me, I think with my teacher pushing me and me always being able to get these scholarships, it's like I had this talent thing. And people were always responding to that, but I felt completely inauthentic because I wasn't doing anything. I was just standing up there and reading these lines, and they were like, oh. And so for years I had this incredible fear, like, well, what if that doesn't show up one day? And someone gave me this great role, I got to play Billie Holiday one day, and I botched it completely, but it was like I needed to know what it was like to fail because I did not trust this talent thing. I knew it was going to let me down one day, and I just botched this part. And then after I got married and had my first child, I went back and studied with a man named William Esper, and his work was not about. In college at Carnegie Mellon, they were like, you're talented, nobody cares. People who work hard are going to get more work than you, and it was just about beating me up for having this talent thing. And Bill's work was about bringing all that was me into the work. And it wasn't bad that I had talent. He just wanted to teach you how, if a day came where you didn't feel like even being at the theater, there were steps you could take so that you'd still be doing the behavior that the audience knew was necessary for the role. And I studied with him for 2 years, and his belief is, you study for 2 years and then you go work, and maybe it takes another 7, and then you're an actor. And so after leaving that, I felt like I got craft. I don't have to worry about being talented, and I could go in and I knew how to conceive the behavior that would convey to the audience what was necessary in the moment. And so that gave me a level of security that when I got Jelly's Last Jam, which was a show where I had an audition on a Saturday. I was the last person of all people, and they gave me like 4 lines. And I went in, and they were funny lines, and I read them. I went, ba-dum-bum, ba-dum-bum, ba-dum-bum. And then they gave me the script, and it was like, this is an amazing woman. Oh, my God, can I live this? And I went to rehearsal, and I was so afraid to apply all these things there that I didn't for lots of rehearsals, and people sort of looked at me like, why did she get this job? And then I did this run-through, and I risked being all this stuff, and they hated it because they weren't looking for that. And it was my struggle to say that I was more interested in doing this craft thing than just being my talented, fabulous self. And, you know, ultimately that was successful for me, but it was a struggle.
John?
Well, Peter, I went the old-fashioned classic way. I don't know, Peter, did you go to drama school?
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you go to drama school? Did you go to drama school?
Right.
I didn't finish.
Yeah, I went to drama school. So a lot of us went to drama school, and that's the one thing that maybe you're asking about. Where do you get the craft? Yes, it was one thing to do it sort of instinctually on stage at Bates, but then, like, you're in Maine, and then, like, how do you get a job? How do you become an actor and you're in Maine, you know? Boston, you know, New York. I mean, New York was like Oz, Hollywood, forget about it. You're not even thinking in those terms. You can't get there from where you are. So then I was in the library one day, and I read about the Yale Drama School. I thought, Yale Drama? I didn't even know they had a drama school. I didn't know what a drama school was. I sent away for the brochure. I read it. I thought, wow, that sounds cool. I applied to Yale, and I got in. And I spent 3 years there learning craft, starting every single day with yoga. An hour of yoga, learning stretching and movement, the body, and learning that your body is your instrument. Then going to vocal exercises and singing classes and fencing and mask work and scene class, and, you know, for 3 years. Then, after the end of my first year at Yale, I became a director, and I got a double master's in directing as well. And now I find myself, you know, 25 years later, doing a play off-Broadway called The Director. And we've done now 85, 90, 100 something performances. And sometimes I'm really tired, like you. How do you show up at night? I know how difficult it is. We call it emotional mountain climbing, to come on stage every night when you're suffering personal whatever pain at home and your life is falling apart a little bit, yet you have the responsibility of going on in front of an audience. How do you do that? Well, what I do is that I go back to my Yale craft days, and I go backstage and I do yoga. And I start every night before I go on stage. I mean, our director, Evan, is here. He'll tell you I'm back there doing yoga, stretching, and then I go into the shower because there's no other place to do it. It's a little theater, right? So I close the door to the shower, and I do vocal exercises. And I'm saying, rakakaranana rapaparatata ragakaranana, you know, and all, you know, scales and warming. And what happens is that tired, battered, you know, self that arrived at the theater thinking, oh my God, suddenly it becomes energized and becomes gigantic inside. And the energy is released with the vocal exercises and your imagination. I start doing lines from the play, and by the time they're knocking on the shower door saying, places, Mr. Shea, I'm ready. And I come out, you know? I am, I don't know, it's magic. It's like the adrenaline pumps. And then I go out onto the stage, and I enter in the dark, and I go up into my little space before the lights come up, and I actually do a sign of the cross in front of the audience, because I feel we're under an old church, and I think it's like a holy space. And I remember that the roots of acting are spiritual in nature, and that we're all, in a way, you know, like priests on the stage, and priestesses, you know, like telling stories to congregations who are there to be uplifted, and that we have a spiritual responsibility to become those characters. And so anyway, when you start thinking about those things, that's the craft. Then it allows you to go on even when your talent is waning.
Well, suppose the audience doesn't react to all that energy and everything that you're giving. Then what do you do?
If the audience doesn't react...
do you have something that you call upon?
Well, why don't we ask somebody else that?
All of you.
What you call upon is your agent, I think.
There has
but
to be
I think you're always going to run
into
into such audiences, and I think there's nothing, it's not your fault. Do you take it as your fault?
No.
Well, I mean, by listening to all of this, when does this air? When does this first air? Seriously, do you even know?
This show, no, we don't know.
You have no idea.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter. I think you're getting some information.
See, that's
Television is exciting.
That's the crack I'm talking about, that
in.
you can be discussing and thinking about being on the panel and answering the question, and yet one eye of you is looking at this and saying, look what's happening over here, and then go right back into character again. That is
craft.
Yes.
That's right.
I have undergone the first severe stage fright of my career, and I think, you know, I'm now middle-aged, and I've had some wonderful successes and things that fit me really well. But for various and sundry reasons, when I began rehearsals for Moon, I had a confidence crash. I had none, less than. And so I had to build a structure for this amazing role in this most remarkable play with no confidence. And I had seen Colleen do it when I was 16, and it had changed my life. So I was dealing with the ghost of Colleen. I was dealing with things that I don't need to go into. But I was left with a structure that was not always, it doesn't serve me as well as I would have liked to have created. And in Chicago in particular, it took every amount of courage I had to get on stage every night. I was completely constricted and paralyzed and terrified. I would literally go on stage and pose in this position and say this line, and walk over here and pose in this position and say that line. And it was, and I've said that if I could have broken my leg neatly, my left tibia, you know, so that I wouldn't be lame for the rest of my life, I would have done it in Chicago, because I knew I had to come to New York and open in this Broadway show. They weren't going to fire me. I was one of the stars. You know, if I hadn't been the star, they just could have fired me. I would have been out of my. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about. I mean, that's the terrible thing about success. When you get successful, they don't fire you because you're part of the money. You know, you're why. But if before success, they just fire you and you're out of your misery and you can get beyond it and you can go on to the next thing. But there was no way out, you know. I was trapped. And it was so humiliating because I'm a decent actor, you know. I have pride in what I do, and I just wasn't being able to do it. So I had to call upon all that craft that I have built up over the years just to get out there. And opening night in New York was one of the most terrifying. I thought, if I can get through this, then there are a few things in life professionally that I will not be able to handle. Because I was really convinced that I might not make it through the night. It was that I was in that kind of panic and terror. I am now, it has subsided, and I'm starting to breathe again. And within the structure that I have to work with, I go to work every night, and it feels like salvation for me to have another chance to grow within this structure that will only ever be this big because we can't go back and start rehearsals all over again, you know. But it's been a tremendously humbling, and I've learned that, I mean, it's been a personal failure for me, but one that I am learning from, because we must allow ourselves to fail. And that's what I've learned from this, because we don't let ourselves fail in this business. And my mama used to always say, never confuse your self-worth with your professional success or failure. And it's something that's impossible to do in this business, or any business that people are passionate about. But as long as you know it in the back of your head, that that is the truth and that is the goal, it helps you get through it. And also, when I was at my lowest ebb, I would think, you know, we're not meant to play every role, and I would think of Colleen Dewhurst coming down the stairs as Catherine Sloper, and it would make me laugh so hard.
That's wonderful.
that I would, you know.
Yes, as the heiress, that would be remarkable. Now, first of
she
all,
probably could have done it, but
yes, but
it would have been funny.
Been a larger staircase.
Yes.
Patrick, you and Jennifer both come from a slightly different system, or maybe not. In other words, English actors, Americans think of a much more formal education. I mean, the Royal Academy is legendary, and the other schools there. Was that your experience?
Yeah. I was getting some kind of formal training from the age of 12. My local authority, it was unique in England, provided professionals to train amateur actors. And so I was getting a lot of that, a lot of verse, a lot of movement and speech from the age of 12. Someone once defined to me craft, or technique, as I've always thought of it, as being what you use when you don't feel it anymore. But what Jerry said just now about failing and the right to fail is really important, because I grew up when the repertory system in England was still so huge. Every really small town had a permanent repertory company. And so I suppose in the first 4 or 5 years that I was an actor, I probably appeared in 60 or 70 plays, maybe more. And I failed in a lot of them because I was miscast. You know, you make use of the permanent company to do everything and anything. But also, nightly, you're learning a discipline. For one thing, in weekly rep, the discipline of learning, and the discipline of showing up, and of being entertaining and different. And also the ability to fail and acknowledging what lies behind that failure. My son is an actor here in New York, and he doesn't have that opportunity of doing play after play after play. He looks for one play. He had one play last year, one play this year. It's so hard to acquire these skills now. I've found, Jennifer, that here in New York, that actors, successful professional actors, take their craft, it seems to me, much more seriously than I experienced in England. I remember my first time here in 1970 with Midsummer Night's Dream, meeting an actor who had just won a Tony, and I was at a party with him, and he told me the next morning he was starting a class. And I said, class? Why do you need to go to class? He said, well, I don't do tap, and I want to learn tap. Now, one of my 2 leading ladies in Mount Morgan, the morning, what am I saying, the morning, the evening that we opened, went to a rapier and dagger class. I don't think that happens quite so much in England. Here people seem to take that craft, even when they're successful, more seriously.
Did you, are you from did you go through a formal theater education?
I suppose it was supposed to be. I don't think it really was. I don't think any of us really learnt much at all at drama school. And I don't know whether that's the school's fault or not, and I'm not going to say on television that it is. But I don't think we did. I think we were at a school that was going through a strange time. And I'm sure I have some craft. I survived 15 months at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I must have some craft somewhere. And I didn't think I would, but I did. And so it must be there. But I think it's come about from doing things. I think all of it. And I think it shifts from part to part. I mean, a bit like what Shea was saying about going about sort of absolving yourself into a character. It just, you sort of, I think the part teaches you and the play teaches you. And what I'm doing at the moment, sort of, you feel really awful if you bring any craft on stage, really, because it sort of feels like, and so we don't really, and that sort of has become the craft of this particular piece, is that there isn't any, so there's no blocking, there's no anything. We just kind of do what we want to do. And of course things have emerged that are important to tell the story. And you think, oh, that sort of works more often than not. But the freedom of that is a craft in itself,
but
to stay that open.
More it's a thrust. I mean, you're out in the audience, isn't it?
Well, we've gone about 3 feet into. I mean, when we first did it, it was 3 sides.
Yeah, right. That's what I mean. The change from that to a proscenium theater.
Yeah, I mean, we want the audience to see us, so you know, you generally, although we
But
do
you really are improving.
a lot of it. I mean, we can do whatever. I mean, because most of it is there are 2 actors on stage. For most of it, it's and Stephen Delane, who and I sort of the ones in most of those scenes, just the 2 of us, and we sort of just trust each other and do what we want.
What they do is extraordinary. Have you
Yes,
ever
I have,
seen
and it's quite
It is
remarkable.
extraordinary
It's remarkable.
because when the play began, I had a feeling that I shouldn't be there watching. There was something so private and exclusive about it. But
Oh God,
what
we
you
didn't we didn't offer you a drink at the party.
I had plenty to drink at your party. but what you did was that you drew us, at least me speaking for myself and my companion, you drew us into your experience. I don't think I've ever seen a company working in quite the way that this company works. It's as though you're permitted to be a little tiny fly on the wall, observing what's happening inside these rooms, and it's thrilling.
You brought up a very interesting thing, and Shea hit upon it first, and now you're kind of sideswiped it right then, and that's this. What most people, even playwrights and people who are in the theater but don't perform, find mysterious is how can you go out there 8 times a week, week after week, month after month, playing the same part? Now, you talked about the fact that at this particular play, you are using it as a development, it's happening to you that way. I once wrote something that Julie Heiress did on the stage, and she told me that she looks at a long run as a chance to keep getting better in the role. Well, you know, but how do you face, in other words, you've all had long runs, all of you. And how do you, what is it after 5 months, 6 months? Are you bored? Are you exhilarated? What is it that you go out there and do the same thing you did that you've done already 111 times?
I think for me the challenge is definitely, obviously, to keep getting better with each performance, but definitely having done long runs before, at some point, that kind of fizzles and the boredom sets in. It's inevitable, it happens. So you have to call on what you've learned in all that time that you've been doing the show up until that point. You have to call on all that experience and all that character growth that has accumulated underneath you, and you have to use that, and you have to go out there and give that same performance, and inside of you, you may not be feeling the same thing that you felt 5 months earlier, that same exhilaration. It's just impossible. You can't. But you use what you've learned, and you've used the growth of that character to give that same performance.
Tell you were in Joe Class Jam a long time. Do you go into overdrive at a certain point?
For me, I think I discovered I'm not meant to be a 9-to-5er. So I don't think I'm ever finished with a role at opening. I mean, it's sort of like, in a way, you just start to work, because if you've been rehearsing all the way up to your opening, you haven't even done it enough times to even synthesize it, and then it just takes time to start thinking, and then as you're playing it, more ideas come to you that you couldn't think about because you were worrying about other things. So that usually will last me about a year, and then it's time for me to leave.
Yeah, sounds like
it's time for me
I was
to
thinking
leave.
of that because in Cats, there's one lady who's been in it the entire run, and Marion Seldes is famous for staying with plays for their entire run, and it's a remarkable discipline. John, what happens to you after a long time?
Well, what happens is that you go through peaks and valleys. I think anybody who's been in a long run will know that there's a period of discovery at the beginning, which is exhilarating, then you plateau into a period of repetition and sort of boredom, and then you break through. If you stay long enough and you're still searching, you break through into another period of discovery sometime into the run, which is really exciting. And a well-written play, if it's got depth to it, and if your subtext, that craft thing that the actor provides, the thoughts, is rich, then it's infinite in its possibility. And also, every audience is different. Some audiences just sit and listen, other audiences laugh and applaud, and so you learn that the audience teaches you about the play.
Also, other actors come and go from the production, and if you've been
that's
there
a
for a
good
long
point.
time, new people come and
That's
go,
a good point.
and they give and they bring completely different things to the
They wake
production
you
and
up.
performance, and they wake you up. And so you may have been complacent doing, I've been sitting like this for 6 months talking to this person, you know, and then a new person comes in and you can't, for whatever reason, you can't sit like that anymore. And you have to figure out a new way to sit and a new way to, you know, and so that kind of, you know, lights a fire.
I think it was on one of these seminars that Marion Seldes said that in discussing the long runs, I won't hear it. She said, what would you think if you were lying in a hospital room and the doctor said, oh my God, this is the 50th appendectomy I did today. I'm so bored. And she said, no, you have taken an oath to the audience. You were an actor. And the audience is different every single time. And so with that, we have to now stand up, stretch, and think a little bit about what we want to ask these wonderfully gifted people. And don't go far away, because we'll be right back.
This is CUNY TV, Channel 75.
Welcome back to the seminar on working in the theater. Before we return to this wonderful group of panelists, I would like to remind you that the Wing is more than a sponsor of seminars and more than our famous Tony Awards for excellence in the theater. The Wing is an organization whose year-round programs are dedicated to serving the theater and the community. And since one of our goals is developing new audience for the theater, we have created meaningful programs for students like Introduction to Broadway, which began 8 years ago and has enabled more than 80,000 New York City high school students to attend a Broadway show, many for the very first time. And through our theater and school programs, theater professionals like these on our seminars go directly into classrooms to work with and talk to students about working in the theater. In addition, we have a hospital program which dates back to World War II when we operated our legendary stage door canteens. And today's version of the program brings talent from Broadway, off-Broadway, and the cabaret world to entertain patients in hospitals, senior day and nursing facilities and centers, and child care facilities in the New York area. They all bring the magic of theater to those who are unable to get out to enjoy the theater themselves. We are proud of the work we do and are delighted with the wonderful working relationship we have with the theatrical community. We're indeed grateful to our members and everyone who makes possible all that the American Theater Wing does. So, now, let's continue the seminar with our moderator, Peter Schoen, the only writer to win a Tony, Oscar, and Emmy Award. Peter, congratulations on all three of those, and please start work on them.
Let's do something a little closer, maybe to an acting exercise in one sense. No one's going to have to act. But what I want to do is I want to throw out a question that's maybe a little more controversial, editorialize something, and then why don't you argue with each other? And basically it's this, that writers are one of the things that they're most confused by and have opinions very strong are things such as the method. In other words, the actor's studio approach in New York, which is a kind of modified Stanislavski approach to creating a part, as opposed to perhaps, we'll call it the Royal Academy School, where a part is created and you set it and you reproduce it every night, don't produce it every night. And it's always been, writers find film, I've done a lot of film, and you love the idea of the method, or the actor studio idea, because you have to, your concentration has to be immediate, as we spoke with John about having to pick up a scene in the middle before you've done the scene before it and the scene after it and so forth, and that concentration in front of all that technical stuff. But it seems to writers, speaking for the group I've talked to at least, who don't like it much in the theater because it requires, every night becomes a kind of a gamble. Is the person going to feel like it that night? Rather than you watch the great classical actors come from England who reproduce it, have done it, have said it, and they go out there. I'm not saying they're, as I said, on overdrive, but they have their character already. So, have you, I mean, has any of you been trained method-wise and feel that as being something that's valuable? Or is, in other words, would you rather have your character totally set by opening night, despite the fact that you're, in this particular one, growing in it? Or is it something that you want to, every night, come out and recreate, not reproduce, but recreate?
I've had this experience once where a director-writer was unhappy with my performance because the way I said the lines every night was different. And he wanted to hear the rhythm of his words a certain way every night. Well, of course, I won because the bear is going to do what the bear is going to do when I get out on the stage. I actually find that when I fall into a rhythm of saying things, I'm being bad, you know, and I will make myself come up with any other way, a meaning that might not be appropriate, just because I know I'm not really in the moment if I've kind of fallen into ba-dum-ba-dum-ba-dum, da-ba-dum-dum, you know, so that's how it is for me. I try to just be present with the people that are there, and it just, I don't think I ever change the content or the intent, but, you know, for a writer who's used to a rhythm, I am not able to give that.
Have you ever used the, I mean, do you practice a Stanislavski approach as opposed to a more classical acting approach? Have you ever been in that position to try either or depend on either?
I suspect that these are questions that interest the general public more than they do actors.
Oh, that's an
I have a feeling, something I'm getting from all of my pals up here, that we really don't know what to say to this question, because I have no answer to it. In my formal training at Bristol, yes, Stanislavski was taught, and his textbooks were set texts for us. But then I had a director who had his own wacky ideas about how acting should be taught. And I don't know anymore what I do. There's certainly no method attached to it at all. I guess it's pretty much hit and miss, really.
Stewart method, you would call it.
Yeah.
When I was at Carnegie Mellon, we had 4 different acting heads the 4 years that I was there. And they would march in and say, our way is the one way, the true way, and the only way, and forget all else that you have been taught. And then that regime would march out at the end of the year, and the next one would come in and say, we are the one way, the true way, the only way. And of course, it made us very jaded, cynical seniors by the time we were graduating. But it also was marvelous because we had all these different techniques at our disposal, and you steal from this one and that one, and whatever the hell you can to come up with the
Jones method.
The Jones method, right.
You find
a mishmash.
You ultimately rely on everything that you've learned to put it together?
I was just going to say that maybe more about playwrights than the actual question. But when we were rehearsing The Real Thing, and Tom Stoppard was there for the first few weeks of rehearsal, certainly, and then sort of came and went. And I think he found it extremely frustrating because it is done in a different style than I think he's seen his work done before. And he obviously has heard a rhythm. He had heard a rhythm 20 years earlier when he wrote it and remembered that, obviously. And we would sort of do a scene, and he would say, well, yes, he'd say, I don't understand. He said, well, that was it, but it was it last time as well, but it was totally different. But why didn't you just do that again? Because that was right. So why did you do it right a different way this time? And we said, well, that's just because, and basically it was just been a process over the last year of getting to know the text and the story and the bare bones of the story, and then know where you can put the meat, what night you want to kind of flesh out the bones and do it the way you want. But it was very important to us to sort of know all the different ways that you could tell it right.
So you're doing also, but you mentioned you're doing improvisational things.
Blocking, but that's...
In the blocking, but that's been done. Is it now as set as it was, or does it continue to change?
It continues to, it's pretty open, yeah. It's open.
And so you feel a certain, it has to do simply with how it's going.
Well, it does, because I think with this play, I don't know, don't want to go on too much about The Real Thing because it's a bit boring, but
No, it's not.
It's okay, all right. Well, the central relationship is, if you don't have that central relationship in the play between these two people, then it all sort of, everybody falls down, basically. And so it is something that sort of has to kind of happen.
Because improvisation is the one word that scares playwrights to death, obviously. Although
we're not improvising. Stop.
No, I understand. It's more blocking than in words.
I thought for a long time about putting together a little slim volume, and maybe we could start it right here of instruction for actors, because there were things that they didn't teach me at drama school. And there were things that nobody said to me. I had to find them out by watching other actors and drawing my own conclusions. And I think many of these are very simple. Maybe it would only be a 3-page volume.
I think not. I think it would be quite a...
I've thought of approaching actors to give me some of their... I mean, for instance, one of them that I firmly believe in is never touching the furniture when you're on stage. Ever. Unless you actually have an action which is something to do with furniture. But never touch it, because touching the furniture is weak and weakens one. Never point on stage either, unless again you have to say, no, not you, you. For example, pointing is also very weak. Everybody on the platform, especially Tony, is looking at me as I'm on stage.
I'm thinking of all the moments in my show where I'm pointing.
We're all going to go all night, right? And think of all the furniture I touch all night long.
Oh, your furniture touchers have...
God, I thought this was such wisdom. Bullshit.
It might be wisdom. It might be something that you found something quite revolutionary.
What's number 3?
I absolutely swear by it, and I couldn't do this for years and years, and you do it wonderfully in your play. She is terrifically still for huge sections of her play. Is just letting your arms hang by your sides and doing nothing with them is the strongest and most potent thing that an actor can do, and young actors especially tend not to know that. They over-gesture and overwork their arms, but stillness is so powerful on stage.
Someone called it putting your arms on mute.
Exactly, exactly.
You know,
You
so
sometimes
hard.
feel silly standing there. I don't know. I sometimes think, oh no, I've got to do something.
Especially
Surely I've got
musical.
to do something.
But
This
you're
is
a great
ridiculous. And then I think,
listener.
no, you don't, because if you do something, you'll look even sillier. So just stand here, maybe nobody will notice you.
You know, writers see actors in a way as people who, when you give them their sides, they use the yellow marker and do their lines, and then the other person's lines sometimes come as a surprise. Early on in the production, comes, oh, really? What's going on while I'm doing that, you know? And so forth. And so it's what you say is very interesting, because it's hard, especially when you are a person of obviously you must be a person of ego to do this kind of work, to imagine that when somebody else is talking, nobody's really looking at you, in a sense, you know? You're out of the focus a bit, although not so that you can scratch in bad places, but that listening thing to contribute to focusing the audience on the person speaking is.
It also has a terrific dynamic. I mean, I actually also remember, Cherry, in Heiress, you did a lot of listening, and you were also incredibly still for much of that. That kind of concentrated listening has a terrific dynamic about it. It's very potent on stage.
No, I cut you off.
No, it's all right. What it does, too, is that we're listening to you speak now, and so it also directs the focus to what the story that's being told is, and that's the job of the actor as well, to help focus the story as it's being told. But I was thinking back to your original question. I thought about this a lot, too, and I think if you look back at the 20th century, the history of the American acting technique, well, there really wasn't any up until about the 1950s. So let's say from 1900, coming out of the 19th century American acting tradition, which is essentially Shakespearean, from John Wilkes Booth and Edwin Booth and Edwin Forrest and those guys, they were basically guys who studied in the great Shakespearean English tradition. And we basically had the English tradition here in America in the theater through the group theater back probably to the 40s and the 50s. With the group theater and with Clifford Odets, there started to become this new exploration, even in the late 30s, of naturalism. And the concept that you didn't have to be a king to have your story told. You could be a guy who works in a kitchen. And so people started behaving different ways. Instead of sitting regally, you could pick your nose, you could chew gum, you could smoke cigarettes, you could have holes in the soles of your feet, and there was a kind of real person that was on stage for the first time. And then that kind of exploration of work started to become, you had to teach a bunch of actors then how to act that way, because everybody thought that speaking with a British accent, and being royal and whatever was the right way to do it. But suddenly there are guys from the Bronx who were on stage, writers who were writing characters in the Bronx, and it was okay to be an actor from the Bronx. As a matter of fact, it was better than an actor who spoke with perfect diction. And so the American techniques of the Stanislavskian techniques that incorporated that into Strasberg's work and Meisner and all the other guys who were exploring a kind of American naturalism became embodied in what we call the method. And then there was an exploration in the method. But now I think that what's happened at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century is that what we have is a synthesis of the two things. We have the English technique, which I remember when I was in drama school, was summarized as working from the outside in. I remember with Olivier and those guys who we were studying, they would build a nose, they would build an ear, they'd build a character, they'd have a speech, or they'd have a limp, or they'd have a hump. And from that would come a character. And so there was an outside sort of mask that was put on, and then the internal character started to emerge. And then for the American technique, it was working from the inside out. What were your emotions? How do you relate to the play? And what kind of memories and things can you bring to this character that brings it alive? And now at the end, I think all of us would probably, I don't know, I would think that we would all agree that we work both from the inside out and the outside in, depending on the kind of character. And maybe with every character, use a little bit of both. I know that when I'm on stage right now, and this character, if you ask me how we brought it to life, it's the play's the thing, definitely. I read that character. I read the play over and over every night before I go on stage. I'm looking at the lines. I'm discovering something new. And I discover that, but that by doing it organically, by reading it and then rehearsing it and then slowly doing it in a course of rehearsals and performance, things start to happen to you from the inside out. I knew from the outside in that the guy wore a certain kind of boots and he wore a certain kind of clothes. That makes me behave a certain kind of way. But I also know that inside out, I find myself doing gestures that I've never done in life. It's not quite pointing, but at one point I say to the guy, you can either sit or go. Now, I never do this in my life. What kind of a gesture is that? Go. You know, it's like go. But I find my character does that twice in the play. And I've kept that character. I've decided that that's a character gesture. That's what my character does. It's different from what John Shea would ever do in real life, but for some reason, you know what I'm saying? So by doing the play, the character makes you do things. And you discover this, and then you decide what to keep.
I think you can go as good. Pointing, however, is not. Tanya.
I was really intrigued by you talking about listening and people being really good listeners on stage, because I really believe that is, in my little instructional book of acting, that's the #1 thing you do. And that if you have a really fine actor that you're working with, they give you your performance.
I also think
because if you listen to them and respond to them and they're good and you just behave, you don't have to work. And that's, to me, why a playwright gets a different performance, because every night that wonderful person you're working off of is different and your response to them is different. So it's an improvisation in the moment with the same material.
And I think, just to reiterate, I think that to listen, it really is one of the most important, if not the most important things to do. And I find, for me, the most difficult thing to do is because are you listening or are you acting like you're listening? And I think it's very clear, the distinction between the two, and to actually listen to what the other person is saying and not be thinking about my line and what my response is going to be, and not be, I find that sometimes I'm trying to listen, but at the same time I'm saying their lines in my head because I know them so well. I've heard them every night. I've heard them 8 times a week. So it's a challenge to still try and listen to what they're saying as opposed to saying the words in your head and then respond to that. So it's that distinction between listening and acting like you're listening.
And listening is the character and not the actor.
Right, that too.
Mostly, yeah. There's got to be that little tiny percentage of the actor at work too, otherwise disasters would happen.
Right. Before we were sitting talking, and Patrick and Jerry were talking about being disconnected. Suddenly something happening in the audience that disconnected you momentarily from what you were doing. And how did you get back into it, and what do you mean by
call it the cell phone moment?
You talked about a program suddenly.
A woman placed a program in the middle of the second act of A Moon for the Misbegotten, right there. And we had to, and Gabriel Byrne is in my arms on the floor about 2 feet from that program. And I spent a great deal of the second act that night trying to figure out how I could politely go and kick it right back into the front row. And I actually finally positioned myself where I could. I had my foot almost on it, and I thought, 1, this is going to be more distracting than the program is, but it'll be out of the way, but it'll be more distracting. And 2, I might, with a major paper cut, decapitate the poor lady who put it there, and I don't want to do that, So I chickened out, and I didn't do it, and then I had to just forget about it and concentrate.
I saw Lawrence Fishburne one night. The cell phone moment got to him, and he finally was in his penultimate scene, and he just finally broke. And has any of you ever broken and turned to the audience?
Yeah.
What? I'd love to hear that.
3 or 4 times, and it's always been a mistake, and I've always regretted it. I have yelled at audiences.
Sometimes they deserve it.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
they must. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it.
What did you yell?
I told him to shut up. It was
That's
at the
brave.
Barbican. It was at the Barbican in Henry IV, and I began, Henry IV begins so one with care, the opening speech, and the audience just weren't ready for the play to begin. They were still having conversations, so I said, shut up at them. Shut up, shut up, shut up! And then they said, I'm going to start again, and I went back to the speech and began again, and it was a disaster. And I also once in a small theatre, like the Donmar, a girl was taking notes on a front row. She had a huge notebook and one of those jumbo pencils, you know? This was doing The Merchant of Venice, and she was in my eye line in the trial scene, so I went over and I snatched this thing out of her hand and I broke the pencil, and I said, and it wrecked the evening.
Well, it might.
Add this to my little book of instruction. Don't shout at the audience.
That's number 3.
Don't interfere with them in any way.
Jennifer, you nodded when it came up. What did you do?
Oh, just the cell phone thing. There was a night or 2 nights, I think, maybe at the Obie in London when a cell phone would go off, and each time I thought it was just me that looked, then I'd realize later that Steve and I would actually look at exactly the same moment. Because there are times when there was no reason to go on. It was both times it was at a moment in the play where everybody is aware of the cell phone and
You can't.
But
it's never.
You just sort of wait for it to come back. It also had been broken down very early at the Obie because we had the audience shout on the first night that they couldn't hear one of the actors. And so the audience had called up, "Speak up, we can't hear you," and had got a round of applause because we'd come from this little 250-seat theatre and we sort of were hoping we were going to buy ourselves a couple of weeks to gradually expand. And on the first preview, we got this. And so then there was sort of, for the next couple of weeks, it did feel like there was that wall was, that membrane was.
None of you has ever just inadvertently yelled out Gesundheit or anything like that.
No, but what we're talking about is a really important thing because what we try to do on stage is create a cocoon of concentration that kind of is woven, then weaves a spell over the whole audience, and that if we're really focused on each other when we're listening, you know that feeling in a theater where you can hear the pin drop and everybody's in that world and the story's being told and there's some magic, this energy that is communicated between us. And if something shatters it, like a phone going off or something, that program or whatever, what it does is like somebody has taken a dagger and he's gone right into that cocoon and he's torn it, and it's an act of violence. And what happened to me, I was on stage the other night doing this and working with a great actress named Tasha Lawrence, and as Tasha and I were standing there, there was somebody spoke in the theater, a woman rustling in something in her bag, and suddenly the cocoon was broken for a moment, and the magic was gone, and I stood on stage with her, and I thought, I'm naked here on stage. We're in a tacky little theater, like under a church, telling this, story that was only being kept alive by our kind of will and spirit and blood. And that this is a set, and I'm in a costume, and why was I born, and why am I not? It was like this kind of awful existential moment where I felt completely vulnerable and completely naked. And for a moment, O'Neill has that, for a moment, the curtain is drawn back, and you see, and it's like you saw the falseness of the theater, and the fact that we're all just up there weaving this fantastic lie. And then suddenly I thought, how do you get back? And it was exactly what Tanya said, which is go back into the other person's eyes. And I lost myself in Tasha's eyes and listened to what she had to say, and suddenly it sealed itself again magically, and we were back on stage and back in the play. But it's a dangerous moment.
Could I get back to the nitty-gritty? We've had so many questions that want to be asked by the audience that we can't possibly get them all in. But one of the most important ones is, how did you get an agent? You started from the very beginning, and how did you get your agent? Can we go around quickly before?
She saw me in a show at drama school. Was it?
I didn't have one for years. I worked in provincial rep, and you don't need agents there. I guess I was been an actor for about 7 years before I got an agent. And I've had lots since then, although I've got a steady now. I've had a steady for 13 or 14 years.
I was at Carnegie Mellon, and they had a summer equity program, and I got to work with the equity actors, and an agent of one of the equity actors came and saw the show and told me that when I came to New York, he would be interested in.
I lost an election bet. No.
I worked on stage in New York. My very first play was called Yentl, Isaac Bashevis Singer play, and agents came to see the play, and I was asked to sign, and I did.
I think I've been fortunate that I've been seen in things and people have seen me, but I think if you don't have work that they can see you do or you're not coming out of a drama program, the best way is always for someone you know to make that introduction.
My agent saw me in a preview of Rent at the New York Theatre Workshop.
So the answer really is that you have to be seen. And so you have to work. And
Unfortunately.
it's a
double-edged sword.
It's the catch-22 in the theater.
There's
you can't
so much
be seen
more.
without an agent, and you can't get an agent till you're seen.
Yeah.
And
And
we
it's
don't
also-
have an agent, but we do have to close this seminar. And it's gone so fast, I can't tell you. I can't believe that it's the time for me to say, this is the American Theatre Wing Seminar on Working in the Theatre, and it's coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And this performance seminar has been simply wonderful. I can't tell you how much has come out of it and how much I've enjoyed it. I've listened to every word that you've said. I've not pointed a finger once. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Peter.